The wind howled across the icy plains of Virilia, a sound like a beast hunting in the darkness. Sarah pulled what remained of her outer garment tighter around her shoulders, though it offered little protection. The purple skin of her face had taken on a bluish tinge from the cold, and her slightly pointed ears burned with frostbite. Her silver eyes, usually bright with determination, now watered continuously as she trudged through knee-deep snow. 3 nights had passed since her escape. 3 nights of burning what little she had to stay alive. The first night, she'd burned her food pack, dried provisions meant to last a week. The warmth had kept her alive for 6 hours before the wind stole it away. The second night, she'd torn strips from her thermal undershirt, watching each piece curl and blacken in the pitiful flame. Last night, she'd sacrificed her boots, huddling close to the acrid smoke while her toes numbed against the frozen ground. Tonight, she had only her outer garment left, the last barrier between her skin and the merciless cold of Virilia. Sarah shuddered as a fresh gust cut through the fabric. The mountain range loomed ahead, dark against the starlit sky. Snow-covered slopes promised no shelter, no respite. Her footprints stretched behind her, a lonely path across the white wasteland. Soon the blizzard would erase them completely, as though she had never existed. A soft scraping sound caught her attention. Something metal against stone. Sarah paused, tilting her head. Through the whipping snow, she glimpsed a faint orange glow nestled against the mountainside. Light, warmth, fear and hope warred within her. Light meant fire. Fire meant pain. Fire meant the marks that crisscrossed her back, permanent reminders of what happened to those who questioned authority. But the cold was death creeping through her limbs with each passing minute. Sarah stumbled forward, nearly falling as her frozen feet refused to cooperate. The light grew stronger, revealing the outline of a small metal structure built against the mountain face. A shelter. Someone lived here, far from any settlement, isolated in the endless winter. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If they were from her kind, they would recognize her immediately. The fugitive, the dissident, the one who spoke against the council. If they were human, humans were unpredictable. Some killed her kind on sight, others simply turned them away to die in the cold. Sarah's fingers fumbled with the clasp of her outer garment. The fabric was sturdy, designed to withstand the harsh Virilian environment. It would burn for perhaps an hour, one final hour of warmth before the end. She hesitated, glancing between the glowing shelter and the garment in her hands. If she burned it now, she would never reach the shelter when the fire died. If she approached the shelter, she risked a worse fate than freezing. The wind decided for her, a vicious gust nearly knocking her to her knees. Sarah gasped as the cold penetrated to her core. She would die within minutes without shelter. Clutching her outer garment around her shoulders, she forced her feet to move toward the light. Each step sent pain shooting through her frozen extremities. 20 meters. 10. 5. Finally, she stood before a metal door set into the side of the structure. Sarah raised a trembling hand and knocked weakly, the sound barely audible over the howling wind. Inside the shelter, Carter looked up from his workbench. 6 months had passed since he'd heard another person's voice. 6 months of voluntary exile in this outpost, living off stored supplies and the energy from his solar panels. The war had left him with more scars inside than out, and humanity's company had become intolerable. The sound came again. 3 faint taps against metal. Carter frowned. No one knew of this place. He'd made certain of that when he'd converted the abandoned mining facility into his home. Perhaps the wind had dislodged something outside. He set down his tools and crossed to the door, one hand instinctively reaching for the shock baton hanging on the wall. Visitors were not welcome here. But something, curiosity, or perhaps some remnant of the man he'd once been, made him disengage the lock and pull the heavy door open. The wind nearly tore the door from his grasp. Carter braced himself against the frame, squinting into the swirling snow. At first, he saw nothing. Then a shape collapsed forward, falling across the threshold at his feet. The light from his small stove spilled across the figure, slight, humanoid, but not human. Purplish skin, ears with a distinctive point, silver eyes now half closed and dulled with exhaustion. An alien. One of the Virillian natives. Carter stared, frozen in shock as the alien woman, for it was clearly female, looked up at him with an expression of pure terror and resignation. Blood crusted around her cracked lips. Her clothing was woefully inadequate for the weather, and frost clung to her eyebrows and lashes. "Please," she whispered. The universal translator embedded near her throat, transforming her native language into accented English. "Fire!" Then her eyes rolled back, and she went limp. Carter stood motionless for a long moment, the wind driving snow into his shelter. Logic dictated that he close the door and leave her outside. Aliens brought complications, questions, the risk of others following. But the sight of her frostbitten skin and the desperation in those silver eyes tugged at something he'd thought long dead. "Damn it," he muttered, reaching down to pull her inside. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, her body radiating a dangerous coldness. Carter kicked the door shut and carried her to the stove, where he laid her on the floor atop his sleeping mat. Her clothes were nearly frozen to her skin. Carter cut them away with medical scissors, wrapping her in thermal blankets as he worked. The process revealed numerous scars across her back and shoulders. Not random injuries, but deliberate marks burned into her flesh in geometric patterns. Torture, or some alien ritual he couldn't fathom. He pressed a warm compress to her face, her neck, her hands, the areas most vulnerable to frostbite. Her breathing was shallow but steady. As the warmth from the stove gradually filled the small space, color slowly returned to her purple skin. Carter retrieved his medical kit and began treating the worst of her injuries, applying regenerative gel to cracked skin, warming her extremities to prevent tissue damage, cleaning dried blood from small lacerations. All the while, he kept his expression neutral, clinical. This wasn't compassion, he told himself. Just basic human decency. The minimum he would do for any creature that collapsed at his door. The alien woman stirred occasionally, muttering words his translator couldn't catch. Each time she sensed the heat from the stove, she flinched away, even in unconsciousness. Carter frowned at this response but continued his work in silence. When he'd done all he could, he reinforced the blankets around her and added more fuel to the stove. The blizzard outside had intensified, battering the metal walls of the shelter. No one would be traveling in that weather. Not human. Not alien. They were both trapped here until the storm passed. Carter settled into his chair across the room, the shock baton within reach. He would sleep lightly tonight, waking at the smallest sound. The alien would likely recover, and when she did, he would need to be prepared for anything. Morning brought no relief from the storm. Carter woke from his light doze to find the alien woman still unconscious, though her breathing had strengthened. He checked her vitals, noting with satisfaction that her core temperature had stabilized. Not out of danger yet, but improving. He prepared a simple broth from his supplies, the rich aroma filling the small shelter. The woman's nostrils flared at the smell, though she didn't wake. Carter spooned a small amount between her lips, careful not to let her choke. Some instinct made her swallow reflexively. Afterward, he gathered his cold weather gear and prepared to check his solar panels. The storm would have covered them with snow, cutting off his power supply if left unattended. "I'll be back," he said to the unconscious woman, feeling foolish for speaking aloud. "Try not to die while I'm gone." The storm hit him like a physical blow when he stepped outside. Carter secured a safety line to his waist, the other end anchored to the shelter door. Visibility was near zero, the snow driving horizontally across the mountainside. He fought his way around the structure to where the solar array stood, now completely buried. It took nearly an hour to clear the panels, his hands growing numb despite his insulated gloves. By the time he returned to the shelter, his face burned from cold, and his lungs ached from breathing the frozen air. The woman was exactly as he'd left her, still wrapped in blankets by the stove. Carter removed his outer layers and hung them to dry, then checked the power systems. The solar panels were functioning at minimal capacity, enough to maintain essential systems but little more. If the storm continued for much longer, he would need to switch to backup power. He prepared another portion of broth and approached the woman. This time, when he touched her shoulder, her eyes flew open, silver irises locked onto his face, wide with confusion and fear. "Easy," Carter said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe. The storm's still going strong outside." The woman pushed herself upright, wincing as the movement pulled at frostbitten skin. The blankets fell away, and she clutched them back with a quick, panicked motion. Her gaze darted around the shelter, assessing exits, threats, resources. "Where am I?" she asked, her translator rendering her words with that same strange accent. "My home," Carter answered simply. "You collapsed at my door last night. I brought you inside." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion evident. "Why?" The question caught Carter off guard. He'd asked himself the same thing through the long night hours. "Because you would have died otherwise," he said finally. "Many would consider that the appropriate outcome for one of my kind trespassing in human territory," she said, her voice flat. Carter shrugged. "I'm not many, and territory lines get blurry out here." He offered the bowl of broth. "You should eat if you can. You need to rebuild your strength." She hesitated, her nostrils flaring slightly as she smelled the food. Hunger won out over caution, and she accepted the bowl with trembling hands. After a tentative first sip, she began drinking more eagerly. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished, the words sounding unpracticed, as though she rarely had cause to use them. "You're welcome." Carter took the empty bowl. "Do you have a name?" "Sarah," she replied after a moment's hesitation. It wasn't her real name. Carter knew enough about alien physiology to know their vocal structures couldn't produce that sound naturally. She'd chosen a human name, either from her translator's database or from previous contact with humans. "Carter," he offered in return. "Former military engineer, current hermit." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before vanishing. "Former prisoner, current fugitive." The blunt admission hung in the air between them. Carter nodded slowly, understanding the implied question. Would he turn her in? "I've been off the grid for 6 months," he said. "Haven't spoken to another living soul, human or otherwise. I don't plan to start now." Sarah's shoulders relaxed fractionally. She glanced toward the stove, and that same tension returned to her body. "You use fire," she observed. "For heat?" "Yes. And cooking." Carter studied her reaction with interest. "You seem afraid of it." "In my culture, fire is not for comfort," she said, each word carefully chosen. "It is for correction, for discipline, for marking those who defy authority." Her hand moved unconsciously to touch her back, where the geometric scars lay. Understanding dawned. "They burned you," Carter said quietly. Sarah nodded, her expression guarded. "My people teach our children to fear fire from birth. Heat is to be endured, not enjoyed. Cold is preferable to the alternative. And yet you burned your clothes to stay warm. I saw the remnants in your hands when you arrived." "Survival necessitates compromise," she said simply. "I chose the lesser terror." Carter moved to the stove and adjusted the damper, reducing the visible flame. "This fire is for survival too," he said. "Nothing more." Sarah watched him, silver eyes reflecting the diminished light. "Why do you live here, alone? Humans are social creatures. It was Carter's turn to measure his words carefully. I spent 10 years fighting a war I didn't believe in. I saw things, did things, that can't be undone. When it was over, I couldn't bear to be around people who would thank me for it. He gestured to the small shelter. This is my penance, or my escape. Sometimes I'm not sure which. I understand exile, Sarah said softly, though mine was not by choice. They fell into silence, the howling wind the only sound. Carter busied himself with checking systems, taking inventory, small tasks that needed no conversation. Sarah remained by the stove, gradually relaxing as the hours passed, without the fire bringing her harm. When night fell, Carter prepared a simple meal from his supplies. Sarah ate cautiously at first, then, with increasing appreciation. This is good, she said, surprise evident in her voice. Military rations with a few modifications, Carter explained. You learn to be creative when you're stationed in remote outposts. We are not given food for pleasure, Sarah said. Only sustenance. Taste is considered a distraction. Your people sound like cheerful company, Carter remarked dryly. Sarah's expression darkened. They are efficient, disciplined. Survival on Virilia demands nothing less. And yet you defied them. She set down her bowl, eyes distant. I suggested that cooperation with humans might benefit both our species. That sharing knowledge of this planet could improve our chances of surviving its extremes. Her lips twisted in a bitter smile. Such thoughts are dangerous, disruptive. I was made an example. The scars, Carter said. Sarah nodded. 3 days of correction. Then exile to the border zone, where the cold would finish what the fire began. Her gaze met his directly. They did not account for human intervention. I'm not exactly humanity's official representative, Carter reminded her. No, she agreed. You are better. An individual who makes choices based on compassion rather than policy. Carter shifted uncomfortably at the assessment. Don't mistake basic decency for something more noble. I'm just a man who couldn't watch someone freeze to death on his doorstep. Sarah didn't argue, but something in her expression suggested she disagreed with his self-assessment. As Carter prepared for sleep, arranging a makeshift bed from spare blankets, he noticed Sarah watching the door with increasing anxiety. The storm will pass by morning, he said, misinterpreting her concern. You'll be able to continue your journey then, if you wish. They will be tracking me, she said quietly. The Council does not allow dissidents to spread dangerous ideas. Now that the snow has lessened, they will follow my trail. Carter frowned. You think they can track you through a blizzard? Our technology is adapted to this environment. Heat signatures, biological markers. The snow preserves these things rather than hiding them. She met his gaze steadily. They will find me. And when they do, they will find you as well. A human harboring a criminal. Let them come, Carter said, more bravado than confidence in his voice. This shelter is well fortified, and I'm not without defenses. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. The hunters won't arrest you or negotiate. They eliminate complications. I've faced worse odds, Carter insisted, though concern now gnawed at him. He moved to a storage compartment and extracted a small, handheld device, which he offered to Sarah. Emergency beacon, military grade. If you activate it, it sends a distress signal that any human vessel within 50 kilometers will respond to. Sarah took the device cautiously. You would call others here? Only as a last resort, Carter said. But if these hunters are as dangerous as you say, it's better to have options. She studied the device, then tucked it into the pocket of the spare clothing Carter had provided. Thank you. Get some rest, Carter advised. We'll reassess in the morning. Sarah nodded, settling back onto the sleeping mat near the stove. Despite her evident exhaustion, her eyes remained open, fixed on the ceiling. They won't come tonight, Carter said, trying to sound reassuring. Not in this weather. "They will come when they come," she replied softly. "Fear won't change that." Her stoicism impressed him. Carter extinguished the lights, leaving only the glow from the stove to illuminate the shelter. He lay on his makeshift bed, listening to the storm gradually weakening outside. Just before sleep claimed him, he heard Sarah's voice, so quiet he almost missed it. "I didn't expect kindness from a human." Carter had no response to that, so he pretended to be asleep. Morning brought an eerie silence. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape transformed by fresh snow. Sunlight reflected blindingly off the white surface, streaming through the small windows of the shelter. Carter woke to find Sarah already up, standing at one of the windows with a troubled expression. "What is it?" he asked, instantly alert. "Tracks," she said, pointing. "Not mine. Someone circled the shelter during the night." Carter joined her at the window, squinting against the glare. Sure enough, a set of footprints formed a perimeter around the building, keeping just beyond the range of any motion sensors he might have deployed. "Reconnaissance," he muttered. "Professional." "Hunters," Sarah confirmed grimly. "They've found me sooner than I expected." Carter moved quickly, retrieving his plasma rifle from its locked cabinet. The weapon hummed to life as he checked its charge, full, thankfully. He then withdrew a smaller pulse pistol and offered it to Sarah. "Ever used one of these?" She accepted the weapon with practiced ease. "Similar enough to our own technology, point and discharge." "It has 3 settings," Carter explained, indicating a small dial. "Stun, incapacitate, lethal. Your choice. But I recommend starting with stun. Killing their hunters will only bring more." Sarah adjusted the setting without comment, her expression unreadable. Carter moved methodically through the shelter, checking systems and defenses. The solar panels were functioning at 60% capacity, not ideal, but workable. The shelter's metal walls would resist most conventional weapons, though a determined attack could eventually breach them. "They'll wait for darkness," Sarah predicted, watching him work. "When the temperature drops again." "How many, do you think?" 3, perhaps 4. A standard hunting party." She met his gaze. "You don't have to fight for me. I can leave now, draw them away." "And then what?" Carter challenged. "Freeze to death in the mountains? Let them drag you back for more correction?" Sarah flinched at the word but didn't back down. "This isn't your conflict." "It became my conflict when you knocked on my door," Carter said firmly. "I made a choice then. I'm not reversing it now." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the first glimmer of trust. She nodded once, accepting his decision. They spent the day preparing. Carter showed Sarah the shelter's layout, pointing out potential escape routes and defensive positions. He distributed emergency supplies, food, water, medical kits, throughout the structure in case they became separated. Sarah proved a quick study, absorbing information and offering tactical suggestions based on her knowledge of the hunter's methods. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of soldiers, rarely needing to explain their actions to each other. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, Carter caught Sarah staring at the stove with an odd expression. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Reflecting on irony. 3 nights ago, I burned my possessions for warmth, believing fire was my enemy. Tonight, I will fight beside a human to protect this fire, this place of warmth." A wry smile touched her lips. "The council would find this most disruptive to their teachings." Carter smiled, despite the tension of their situation. "Disruption seems to be your specialty." "So it would appear." Sarah checked her weapon once more, then took up position near one of the windows, where she could observe the approaches to the shelter without being easily seen. Darkness fell swiftly on Virilia. The temperature plummeted, and ice crystals formed on the inside of the windows despite the shelter's heating system. Carter dimmed the lights, relying on the stove's glow and his military-grade night vision to navigate the space. The first hour passed in silence. Then the second. Carter began to wonder if Sarah had misinterpreted the tracks, if perhaps some local wildlife had made them. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps against the metal door. Sarah tensed, her hand tightening on her weapon. She shook her head in warning when Carter glanced toward the door. "We know you harbor the criminal," called a voice from outside, the words distorted by a translator similar to Sarah's. "Surrender her, and you may live, human." Carter moved to Sarah's side, keeping his voice low. "Options?"
"Few," she whispered back. "They won't leave without me, or without confirmation of my death."
"Sarah of Clan Telvis," the voice outside called. "You are sentenced to final correction for crimes against the Council. Emerge now, and your death will be swift. Resist, and it will not." Sarah's face hardened at the words. She straightened her shoulders and moved toward the door before Carter could stop her. "What are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing her arm. "Facing them," she said simply. "On my terms, not theirs." Before Carter could argue further, Sarah had disengaged the lock and swung the door open. Cold air rushed into the shelter, carrying with it the scent of snow and ozone. 3 figures stood outside, their forms obscured by hooded environmental suits. Each carried a long, staff-like weapon that crackled with energy at its tip. Their faceplates reflected the light from within the shelter, making it impossible to see their expressions. Sarah stepped forward, her small frame silhouetted against the warm light behind her. The pulse pistol hung at her side, not yet raised. "I reject your sentence," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the snow. "And I reject the authority of those who gave it." The central figure tilted its head slightly. "Such defiance, even now, when the outcome is certain." "Nothing is certain," Sarah replied. "Not even death by cold, it seems." She gestured toward the shelter. "I found warmth where you said there was none. I found compassion where you taught only cruelty." "The human," the figure said dismissively. "An aberration. Most would have left you to freeze." "One aberration is enough to disprove absolute truth," Sarah countered. "One exception breaks the rule. The Council is wrong about humans, just as they are wrong about fire, about cooperation, about progress." The hunter raised its staff. "Your heresies end tonight. Will you come willingly, or must we destroy this place and the human with it?" Carter stepped forward then, his plasma rifle leveled at the central figure. "I'd like to see you try," he said evenly. The hunters shifted, clearly reassessing the threat. Their weapons might be deadly, but Carter's rifle could vaporize a target at this range with a single shot. "This is not your concern, human," the leader said. "She is not your kind." "She's under my protection," Carter replied. "That makes it my concern." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension crackling like the energy weapons the hunters carried. Then, the leader nodded to its companions. "Take them both." The attack came with frightening speed. The hunters moved in perfect synchronization, their staffs discharging bursts of crackling energy toward Sarah and Carter. Carter fired a warning shot, the plasma bolt sizzling past the leftmost hunter to impact the snow behind it. The snow instantly vaporized, leaving a smoking crater. Sarah dropped to one knee, her pulse pistol firing in quick succession. The stun blasts caught one hunter in the chest, making it stagger but not fall. These were not ordinary hunters. Then, their suits must offer some protection against energy weapons. Carter adjusted his aim and fired directly at the leader's weapon. The plasma bolt struck true, and the staff exploded in a shower of sparks. The hunter howled, a high, keening sound that cut through the night air, and clutched its injured hand to its chest. The remaining hunters pressed their attack, one charging toward Carter, while the other targeted Sarah. Energy crackled across the snow as their staffs discharged again and again. Sarah rolled aside, the blasts missing her by centimeters. She switched her pistol setting from stun to incapacitate, and fired at her attacker's legs. This time, the hunter went down, its suit's systems temporarily overloaded. Carter found himself engaged in close combat as the third hunter reached him, swinging its staff in a deadly arc. He blocked with his rifle, the metals clashing with a shower of sparks. The hunter was incredibly strong, driving Carter back toward the shelter door. With a desperate move, Carter dropped to the ground and swept his leg in a low arc, catching the hunter's ankles. The alien stumbled, but didn't fall, its balance too perfect. Carter used the momentary advantage to scramble backward, bringing his rifle to bear once more. The hunter was faster. Its staff connected with Carter's shoulder, sending a jolt of paralyzing energy through his body. His muscles seized, and the rifle slipped from nerveless fingers. Sarah saw Carter fall and reacted instantly. She charged the hunter from behind, leaping onto its back with the agility of a predator. Her weight was insignificant to the alien, but the surprise was enough to break its concentration. The hunter spun, trying to dislodge her, momentarily forgetting Carter. It was all the opening Carter needed. He forced his partially paralyzed body to move, retrieving the shock baton from his belt. With a pained grunt, he lunged forward and jammed the baton against the hunter's torso, triggering its maximum setting. The hunter convulsed as electricity surged through its suit. Sarah leapt clear as it collapsed, twitching, to the snow. The leader had recovered enough to retrieve a secondary weapon, a small, compact device that hummed ominously as it powered up. It aimed directly at Sarah, who stood exposed in the open space between the fallen hunters. "For the Council!" it snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. Carter's plasma rifle discharged with a sound like thunder. The bolt struck the hunter squarely in the chest, burning through its protective suit and the flesh beneath. The alien dropped without a sound, its weapon falling harmlessly to the snow. Silence descended, broken only by Carter's labored breathing and the faint hum of the remaining active weapons. Sarah moved cautiously to check each fallen hunter, confirming that 2 were unconscious and 1 was dead. "We should restrain these 2 before they recover," she said, indicating the stunned hunters. Carter nodded, still fighting the effects of the paralyzing blast. Together, they dragged the unconscious aliens into the shelter and secured them with cable ties from Carter's supplies. The dead hunter they left where it had fallen, to be buried by the next snowfall. Inside the shelter, Carter sank onto his chair, grimacing as pain radiated from his injured shoulder. Sarah retrieved the medical kit without being asked and began treating the electrical burn. "They'll send more when these don't report back," she said as she worked, her touch surprisingly gentle. "How much time do we have?" "A few days, perhaps. Their base camp will be beyond the northern ridge, well hidden." She applied regenerative gel to the worst of the burn. "We should be gone before they come looking." Carter raised an eyebrow. "We?" Sarah's hands stilled. "I assumed. But of course, this is your home. I wouldn't expect you to abandon it." She stepped back, suddenly formal. "I'll leave at first light. You can tell them I forced you to help me, then escaped." "That's not what I meant," Carter said, catching her wrist before she could retreat further. "I was just surprised you'd want company on your journey." "Oh," Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "You would come with me?" "This place was never meant to be permanent," Carter admitted. "Just somewhere to hide while I figured things out. And after tonight..." He glanced at the bound hunters. "Well, it's not exactly inconspicuous anymore." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "Where would we go?" "South," Carter suggested. "Beyond the settlements. There's a valley where the mountains block the worst of the storms. Rumor has it a few independent colonists have set up there. Humans and aliens who prefer to make their own way." "Disruptive individuals," Sarah said, her smile widening slightly. "Exactly your kind of people," Carter agreed. They worked through the night, gathering essential supplies and preparing for the journey ahead. Carter's shoulder improved steadily, thanks to the regenerative treatment. though it would be days before he regained full strength. The captured hunters remained unconscious, their systems overwhelmed by the combined effects of the pulse pistol and shock baton. Carter secured them with additional restraints, ensuring they wouldn't follow when they eventually woke. As dawn approached, Sarah paused in her preparations, staring at the stove that had saved her life days earlier. "We'll need fire on the journey," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm ready to learn how to make it rather than fear it." Carter nodded, understanding the significance of her words. "I'll teach you. It's not so difficult once you know how." They finished loading their supplies into backpacks designed for long-range travel. Carter left behind most of his possessions. They were just things, after all. And he'd lived with less during his military years. The sun was just cresting the eastern mountains when they stepped outside, locking the shelter behind them. The dead hunter had already been partially covered by overnight snowfall, nature reclaiming one of its own. Sarah surveyed the pristine landscape, her silver eyes reflecting the dawn light. "Which direction?" Carter pointed toward a gap in the southern mountains. 3 days' journey if the weather holds. There's a natural cave system halfway that we can shelter in." Sarah nodded and took the first step, breaking fresh trail in the snow. Carter followed close behind, his rifle secured across his back, ready if needed. They walked in comfortable silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the ridge that would take them out of sight of the shelter, Sarah paused and looked back. "Thank you," she said simply, "for opening your door that night." Carter smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "Thank you for knocking." Together, they turned toward the south and continued walking, their footprints forming a single path across the endless white. In the days that followed, they established a rhythm to their travel. Carter taught Sarah how to build small, controlled fires for warmth and cooking. She approached each lesson with careful determination, flinching less each time the flames sparked to life. Their fourth night on the trail found them in the promised cave system, a network of tunnels heated by underground thermal vents. The natural warmth allowed them to rest without maintaining a fire, conserving their fuel for the journey ahead. As they ate a simple meal of rehydrated rations, Sarah traced the geometric scars on her arms, now fully visible in the dim light of their portable lamp. "On my world, these mark me as a prisoner," she said thoughtfully. "Someone who defied authority and paid the price." Carter studied the patterns, seeing them now not as wounds, but as a testament to her resilience. "And now they remind me that I survived," she said, a new strength in her voice. "That fire can hurt, but it cannot destroy what I am." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "They tried to burn submission into my skin. Instead, they forged determination." Carter nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. His own scars, some visible, others carried within, had shaped him in ways his younger self could never have imagined. "The journey changes us," he said, "if we let it." Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her alien features into something unexpectedly beautiful. "I think this journey has only just begun." The following morning, they continued south, entering a region where the constant snowfall gave way to occasional patches of exposed rock and stunted vegetation. The air grew marginally warmer, though still bitterly cold by any standard other than Virilia's. Carter found himself watching Sarah as they traveled, noting how she moved with increasing confidence through the terrain. The fearful, half-frozen woman who had collapsed at his door had been replaced by a determined survivor who faced each challenge with quiet resolve. On the 6th day, they crested a final ridge and looked down into the valley Carter had described. Nestled between protective mountain walls, a small settlement sprawled alongside a frozen river. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and lights glowed warmly in the perpetual twilight of Virilia's winter. "There it is," Carter said, pointing. "Independence, They call it. No affiliation with either human authorities or your council. Sarah studied the settlement with cautious optimism. How will they receive us? As individuals, not representatives of our species, Carter replied. That's their way. Judge by actions, not origins. They descended toward the valley, their pace quickening despite their exhaustion. As they approached the outermost structures, a figure emerged from one of the buildings, a human woman wrapped in furs, a plasma rifle similar to Carter's held casually in her hands. State your business, she called when they were within earshot. Seeking refuge, Carter replied honestly. We've traveled from the northern ridge. Had some trouble with hunters. The woman's eyes narrowed as she took in Sarah's alien features and the visible scars on her skin. After a moment, she nodded. Hunters don't come this far south. You'll be safe enough here, provided you contribute to the community. We have skills to offer, Sarah said, stepping forward. And we're willing to learn. The woman studied them for another long moment, then lowered her rifle. My name's Eleanor. I handle new arrivals. She gestured toward the settlement. Come on, then. You both look like you could use a hot meal and somewhere warm to sleep. As they followed Eleanor into Independence, Sarah moved closer to Carter, her arm brushing against his. Is this what you imagined? She asked quietly. When you left your military behind? Carter considered the question, looking at the mixed community of humans and aliens living and working together in this hidden valley. No, he admitted. I never imagined finding a place like this, or someone to share it with. Sarah's expression softened. Nor did I. Eleanor led them to a small building near the center of the settlement. Community Hall, she explained, pushing open the door. Warmth and light spilled out, along with the murmur of many voices engaged in conversation. Inside, humans and aliens of various species sat together at long tables, sharing food and drink. Some played games of strategy, while others clustered around maps and diagrams, planning construction projects or hunting expeditions. Conversations paused briefly as Carter and Sarah entered, curious gazes assessing the newcomers. Then, seemingly satisfied, the community returned to their activities, making space at one of the tables without comment. Sit, Eleanor instructed. Eat, rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to discuss where you'll fit in here. She departed, leaving them to navigate this new social terrain on their own. Carter felt a moment of uncertainty. It had been so long since he'd been around others, especially in such a casual setting. Sarah sensed his hesitation and took the lead, moving confidently to the indicated seats. Carter followed, grateful for her initiative. A large pot of stew was passed their way, along with wooden bowls and spoons. The food was simple but hearty, flavored with unfamiliar herbs that complemented the meat and root vegetables. As they ate, Carter observed the easy interaction between species that should, by all official accounts, be hostile toward one another. There was no tension here, no carefully maintained diplomatic protocols, just individuals who had chosen a different path. It's real, Sarah murmured, echoing his thoughts. What I propose to the council, cooperation, coexistence, it's actually possible. Sometimes seeing is the only way to truly believe, Carter replied. When they had finished eating, an elderly human man approached their table, introducing himself as Dr. Isaacs, one of the settlement's founders. Eleanor mentioned you had trouble with hunters, he said without preamble. From the Northern Council territory? Sarah nodded, her expression guarded. I was exiled for suggesting exactly what I see here. Cooperation between our species. The doctor smiled, deep wrinkles crinkling around his eyes. The councils, both human and Virillian, prefer their neat categories and separations. Makes governance simpler, if not better. He gestured around the hall. We've been proving them wrong for 15 years now. They leave you alone? Carter asked, surprised. Both sides find us inconvenient to acknowledge, Dr. Isaacs explained. Officially, this settlement doesn't exist. Unofficially, they know challenging us would raise uncomfortable questions about their policies. He focused on Sarah. Those marks, the council's work? Sarah touched her scars reflexively. Yes, punishment for disruptive ideas. The doctor nodded gravely. We have others here with similar stories. The council's corrections often create its most dedicated opponents. He turned to Carter. And you, military, by your bearing. Former, Carter confirmed. I'd had enough of following orders that contradicted my conscience. Another common story here, Dr. Isaacs said with a knowing smile. Well, you'll both find independence lives up to its name. We ask only 3 things. Contribute your skills, respect others regardless of species, and defend our community if needed. We can do that, Carter said, glancing at Sarah for confirmation. She nodded her agreement. Excellent. The doctor stood. For tonight, we have a guest cabin available. Tomorrow, you can meet with our housing coordinator about more permanent arrangements. He led them to a small structure at the edge of the settlement, a single room with basic furnishings, but warm and secure. A fire burned in a small stove, similar to the one in Carter's abandoned shelter. Rest well, Dr. Isaacs said, leaving them to settle in. Alone at last. Sarah moved to the stove and held her hands toward the flames. No trace of fear in her posture. From burning my clothes to stay alive, to this, she said softly. A place where fire means safety, not punishment. Carter joined her by the stove, watching the play of light across her features. What will you do now, with your freedom? Sarah considered the question. Share what I know, learn what I don't, prove that the council's ways aren't the only ways. She turned to face him. And you? Is this what you were looking for when you isolated yourself in that shelter? I wasn't looking for anything, Carter admitted. Just trying to escape what I'd been. But now... He gestured toward the window, where the lights of independence glowed in the darkness. Maybe there's something worth finding after all. Sarah smiled, the expression now coming more naturally to her. We have time to discover what that might be. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes drifting past the window. But inside, the fire burned steadily, casting its warm light throughout the small cabin. Carter added another log, watching as the flames embraced it. Sarah didn't flinch at the momentary flare. Instead, she extended her hands closer to the warmth, her silver eyes reflecting the dancing light. On the 4th night, she said thoughtfully, a human opened his door. And found someone worth opening it for, Carter finished. In the morning, they would begin building their new lives in this unexpected community. There would be challenges ahead. The councils might eventually take notice of them. The hunters might someday track them down. But for now, in this moment of quiet companionship, those concerns seemed distant and manageable. The fire crackled softly, a sound that once represented terror and now spoke of comfort. Outside, the cold endured, as it always would on Virilia. But within these walls, warmth prevailed, not just the physical heat of the flames, but the deeper warmth of connection, of understanding, of 2 individuals from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. Sarah stared into the fire, no longer seeing the instrument of her torture, but rather the beacon that had saved her life. Carter watched her, recognizing in her transformation something of his own journey, from isolation to connection, from darkness to light. Together, they had survived the cold. Together, they would face whatever came next. A transport vessel passed low over the valley the next morning, its engines disturbing the fresh snow. Sarah and Carter watched from their cabin doorway as it continued northward, unaware of the settlement hidden below. They're still searching, Sarah observed. But not finding, Carter replied with a small smile. Sarah nodded, a quiet confidence in her posture. We're not ready to be found just yet. Carter closed the cabin door against the cold, and the firelight caught their faces. Two survivors who had learned that warmth could be found in the most unexpected places, if only one had the courage to seek it.